The story of how Islam conquered Arabia is far more than a tale of military victories and political maneuvering. It's a profound narrative of faith, determination, and the remarkable journey of one man whose message would forever change the course of human history. This is the story of Muhammad, the Prophet of Islam, and how his teachings united a fractured Arabian peninsula under the banner of a revolutionary new faith. If you're fascinated by the incredible stories that shaped our world, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to our channel for more amazing historical content that brings the past to life. In the harsh desert landscape of 6th century Arabia, where survival depended on tribal loyalty and trade connections, a child was born who would grow up to unite the entire peninsula. Around the year 570 CE, in the bustling city of Mecca, Muhammad entered a world vastly different from the one he would leave behind. Mecca stood as the beating heart of Arabian commerce and spirituality. Caravans loaded with precious goods from distant lands converged on this desert oasis, making it a crossroads of cultures, languages, and beliefs. The city's greatest treasure was the Kaaba, a sacred cube-shaped structure that housed hundreds of idols representing the gods of countless tribes. Pilgrims traveled from across the peninsula to worship at this holy site, bringing with them not just their devotion, but also their money. Muhammad's family, the Quraysh tribe, sat at the center of this vibrant ecosystem. They weren't just merchants, they were the guardians of Mecca's religious traditions and the architects of its economic prosperity. The young Muhammad was born into privilege, but fate had different plans for his early years. The boy's father, Abdullah, died before Muhammad even drew his first breath. His mother, Aminah, would follow when he was only 6 years old, leaving the child orphaned in a world where family connections meant everything. Yet this tragedy became the foundation of his character. His paternal grandfather, Abdul al-Muttalib, stepped forward to raise the boy, recognizing something special in his young grandson. Abdul al-Muttalib was no ordinary tribal leader. As the chieftain of the Hashim clan within the powerful Quraysh tribe, he commanded respect throughout Mecca and beyond. Under his grandfather's wing, Muhammad learned the delicate art of leadership, how to navigate complex tribal politics, how to build alliances, and most importantly, how to earn trust in a society where a man's word was his bond. The lessons came to an abrupt end when Abdul al-Muttalib passed away in 578 CE, leaving 8-year-old Muhammad in the care of his uncle, Abu Talib. Unlike his influential grandfather, Abu Talib was a humble merchant, but he possessed something equally valuable: unwavering loyalty to his family and an honest approach to business that would profoundly shape his nephew's character. As Muhammad entered his teenage years, he began working alongside his uncle in the family's trading business. The desert routes of Arabia became his classroom, and the diverse communities they encountered became his teachers. From the markets of Damascus to the trading posts of Yemen, young Muhammad observed how different peoples lived, worshipped, and conducted business. These journeys were more than commercial ventures. They were expeditions into the wider world. Muhammad met Christians, Jews, and followers of various Arabian deities. He witnessed the contradictions of his time: incredible wealth alongside grinding poverty, sophisticated theological debates occurring in the shadow of primitive idol worship, and the constant threat of tribal warfare disrupting the delicate balance of trade. What set Muhammad apart from other young merchants was his character. In a world where cheating customers was often considered good business, Muhammad insisted on honest dealing. Where others might exploit their positions for personal gain, he went out of his way to ensure fair treatment for all parties. His reputation grew with each successful transaction, each promise kept, each dispute resolved fairly. The nickname Al-Amin, meaning the trustworthy one, wasn't given lightly in Arabian society. It represented the highest compliment a man could receive, acknowledging not just honesty in business, but integrity in all aspects of life. People began seeking out Muhammad specifically because they knew he would honor his commitments, whether they involved a simple trade agreement or a complex negotiation between feuding parties. But even as Muhammad's reputation flourished in the material world, his spiritual life grew increasingly troubled. The religious landscape of Mecca disturbed him deeply. He watched pilgrims prostrate themselves before stone idols, witnessed the commercialization of faith, and observed how religious differences fueled endless conflicts between tribes. The polytheistic practices that formed the backbone of Meccan society seemed hollow to him, lacking the spiritual depth he craved. Seeking answers to questions that haunted his soul, Muhammad began withdrawing from Meccan society for extended periods. The cave of Hira, located on Mount Jabal al-Nur just outside the city, became his sanctuary. Here, away from the noise and distractions of urban life, he would fast, pray, and contemplate the deeper mysteries of existence. These weren't casual retreats, but intense spiritual journeys that could last for weeks. Muhammad would bring minimal provisions, spending his days in meditation and his nights gazing at the star-filled desert sky. He wrestled with fundamental questions. Who was the true God? What was the purpose of human existence? How should people treat one another? Why did the wealthy live in luxury while the poor struggled to survive? The year 610 CE marked a turning point not just in Muhammad's life, but in world history. During one of his solitary vigils in the cave of Hira, something extraordinary occurred. According to Islamic tradition, the archangel Gabriel appeared before Muhammad in a manifestation so powerful and overwhelming that it left him physically and emotionally shaken. The encounter was unlike anything Muhammad had ever experienced. Gabriel commanded him to read or recite, but Muhammad, who could neither read nor write, protested his inability. The angel persisted, and suddenly Muhammad found himself reciting words that seemed to flow directly from the divine source. Read in the name of your Lord, who created man from a clot of blood. Read, for your Lord is most generous, who taught by the pen, taught man what he did not know. These weren't just words, they were a complete transformation of Muhammad's understanding of reality. The message was clear. There was only one God, Allah, and Muhammad had been chosen as his messenger to humanity. The polytheistic practices of his people weren't just wrong, they were a betrayal of divine truth. The initial period following Muhammad's first revelation was marked by uncertainty and soul-searching. Some historical accounts suggest he kept the experience private for months, sharing it only with his closest family members while he grappled with its implications. Others indicate he felt an immediate compulsion to share the message, though he approached this responsibility with great caution. His wife, Khadijah, became his first supporter and believer. Her acceptance of his prophetic mission provided crucial emotional and financial support during the early years when followers were few and opposition was fierce. Abu Bakr, his longtime friend and business associate, also embraced the message immediately, becoming the first male convert to Islam and eventually one of Muhammad's most trusted companions. The message Muhammad preached was revolutionary in its simplicity and radical in its implications. At its core was the concept of Tawheed, the absolute unity and uniqueness of Allah. This wasn't merely a theological position, it was a complete restructuring of Arabian society's fundamental assumptions. In a world where tribal deities competed for influence and where religious practices often served commercial interests, Muhammad proclaimed that all gods except Allah were false. He taught that every human being, regardless of tribal affiliation, social status, or wealth, was equal before Allah. The rich and poor, the powerful and weak, all would face the same divine judgment based on their actions and faith. These teachings attracted followers, but they also created powerful enemies. The implications of Muhammad's message went far beyond religion. If there was only one God, what happened to the hundreds of idols housed in the Kaaba? If all people were equal before Allah, what happened to the social hierarchies that maintained order in tribal society? If wealth and status meant nothing in the eyes of God, how could the merchant elite justify their privileges? The growing tension between Muhammad's followers and Meccan society reached a breaking point when the economic implications of his message became clear. Mecca's prosperity depended heavily on religious tourism. Thousands of pilgrims traveled to the city each year to worship at the Kaaba and perform rituals at various shrines scattered throughout the region. These pilgrims didn't just bring their prayers, they brought money. They purchased food, lodging, and transportation. They bought religious artifacts, offerings for the gods, and souvenirs to take home. An entire economy had developed around servicing these religious tourists, and many of Mecca's wealthiest families had built their fortunes on this trade. Muhammad's insistence that idol worship was not just wrong, but actually harmful to the soul, threatened to destroy this economic system. If people stopped worshipping the tribal gods, they would stop making pilgrimages. If pilgrimages ceased, the money would dry up. The wealthy merchants who controlled Mecca understood this threat perfectly. Members of Muhammad's own Quraysh tribe led the opposition against him. These weren't just religious disagreements. They were battles for economic survival. The tribal leaders tried multiple approaches to neutralize Muhammad's influence. First, they attempted bribery, offering him wealth, political power, and social status in exchange for abandoning his preaching. When bribery failed, they resorted to social pressure and economic warfare. They organized boycotts against Muhammad and his followers, making it nearly impossible for them to conduct business in Mecca. They spread rumors and propaganda designed to discredit the Prophet and his message. Some even resorted to physical harassment and violence against the early Muslim community. The situation became so dire that Muhammad advised some of his followers to emigrate to Abyssinia, modern-day Ethiopia, where the Christian king offered them protection. This migration, known as the First Hijrah, demonstrated both the severity of the persecution and Muhammad's pragmatic approach to protecting his community. Despite the mounting pressure, Muhammad refused to compromise. He continued preaching, gaining new converts, even as the opposition intensified. His message resonated particularly strongly with those on the margins of Meccan society: slaves, women, the poor, and young people who saw in Islam a path to dignity and spiritual fulfillment that traditional tribal structures couldn't provide. By 622 CE, the situation in Mecca had become unsustainable. The opposition to Muhammad and his followers had escalated to the point where their lives were in danger. An assassination plot against the Prophet himself was discovered, making it clear that remaining in Mecca was no longer an option. It was at this critical moment that representatives from the city of Yathrib, located about 300 miles north of Mecca, approached Muhammad with an extraordinary offer. Yathrib was torn apart by a complex civil war involving multiple Arab tribes and Jewish clans. Years of conflict had left the city economically devastated and socially fractured. The city's leaders, having heard of Muhammad's reputation as a fair and wise mediator, invited him to come and help them resolve their differences. The migration to Yathrib, known as the Hijrah, marked the beginning of the Islamic calendar and represented a fundamental shift in the nature of the Muslim community. In Mecca, Muslims had been a persecuted minority struggling to practice their faith. In Yathrib, which would later be renamed Medina, meaning the city of the Prophet, they had the opportunity to create the first Islamic society. Muhammad's approach to governing Medina revealed his remarkable political skills. Rather than imposing Islamic law immediately, he crafted a document known as the Constitution of Medina that established a framework for peaceful coexistence among all the city's inhabitants. This charter recognized the rights of Muslims, Christians, Jews, and pagans, creating a multi-religious society based on mutual respect and shared civic responsibility. Under Muhammad's leadership, Medina began to prosper. The end of civil war allowed trade to resume, agriculture to flourish, and social institutions to develop. The Muslim community grew rapidly, attracting not only refugees from Mecca, but also local converts who were impressed by the practical benefits of Islamic governance. However, the success of the Muslim community in Medina created new tensions with Mecca. The Meccan leaders recognized that Muhammad was no longer just a religious preacher, but a political leader who posed a genuine threat to their authority and economic interests. The conflict between Mecca and Medina entered a new phase when Muhammad received revelations that permitted Muslims to fight in self-defense against those who had persecuted them. This marked a crucial development in Islamic history, the transition from passive resistance to active defense of the faith. The first major confrontation, the Battle of Badr in 624 CE, became legendary in Islamic history. The conflict began when Muhammad learned that Abu Sufyan, a leading member of the Umayyad clan within the Quraysh tribe, was leading a wealthy caravan from Syria back to Mecca. This caravan represented a significant portion of Meccan wealth, and its capture would strike a major blow against the city's economic power. Muhammad assembled a force of approximately 300 men, a mix of Meccan emigrants and Medinan converts, to intercept the caravan. However, Abu Sufyan had received warning of the planned attack and managed to evade capture by changing his route. Instead of the caravan, Muhammad's forces encountered a Meccan army of nearly 1,000 warriors who had been dispatched to protect the merchant convoy. The odds seemed overwhelming, but Muhammad employed clever tactics to level the playing field. He positioned his forces near the wells of Badr, controlling the water supply and forcing the Meccan army to fight on unfavorable ground. The battle began with traditional single combat between champions from each side, followed by a general engagement between the two armies. In a moment that became part of Islamic legend, Muhammad picked up a handful of dust and threw it toward the enemy lines, declaring that Allah would confuse his opponents. Whether through divine intervention or simply good fortune, the wind carried the dust into the faces of the Meccan warriors, temporarily blinding them and giving the Muslim forces a crucial advantage. The victory at Badr was stunning and complete. The Muslim army not only defeated a force more than 3 times their size, but also killed several prominent Meccan leaders and captured many others. The psychological impact of this victory was enormous. It convinced many that Allah was indeed supporting Muhammad's mission and encouraged more tribes to consider allying with the Muslims. The Battle of Uhud in 625 CE told a different story and taught the Muslim community valuable lessons about the costs of overconfidence. Abu Sufyan, seeking revenge for the humiliation at Badr, assembled an army of 3,000 men to attack Medina directly. Muhammad's forces, numbering fewer than 1,000, initially succeeded in repelling the attack and seemed on the verge of another decisive victory. However, a crucial mistake by some of the Muslim archers changed the course of the battle. Against explicit orders to maintain their positions regardless of how the battle progressed, a group of archers abandoned their posts on a hill overlooking the battlefield to join in what they thought was the final rout of the enemy. This decision created an opening that Khalid ibn al-Walid, one of Arabia's most skilled cavalry commanders, exploited brilliantly. Leading a force of Meccan horsemen, Khalid attacked the Muslim army from behind, creating chaos and turning near victory into near disaster. Muhammad himself was severely injured in the fighting, and rumors of his death spread panic through the Muslim ranks. The Muslims were forced to retreat up Mount Uhud, where they regrouped and prepared for a final stand. However, Abu Sufyan, believing he had achieved his objective of demonstrating Meccan power, decided not to pursue the attack further. He declared victory and withdrew his forces, leaving the Muslims bloodied but not broken. The defeat at Uhud was a sobering experience for the Muslim community. It demonstrated that faith alone was not enough to guarantee victory. Discipline, strategy, and unity were equally important. Muhammad used this setback as a teaching moment, emphasizing that Allah's support required human effort and that overconfidence could lead to disaster. The final major confrontation between Mecca and Medina came in 627 CE with the Battle of the Trench, also known as the Battle of the Confederates. Abu Sufyan, recognizing that Meccan forces alone might not be sufficient to defeat the growing Muslim community, spent months building a coalition of tribes opposed to Muhammad's influence. This Confederate army was the largest force yet assembled in Arabian warfare, numbering approximately 10,000 warriors from various tribes across the peninsula. The sheer size of this army represented an existential threat to Medina. If the city fell, the Islamic movement would likely be crushed entirely. Faced with overwhelming odds, Muhammad decided to try a completely new defensive strategy. On the advice of Salman al-Farisi, a Persian convert who had experience with siege warfare, the Muslims dug a massive trench around the exposed northern approaches to Medina. This tactic was completely unknown in Arabian warfare, where battles typically involve direct confrontation between opposing forces. The trench strategy proved brilliantly effective. The Confederate army, expecting a traditional battle, found themselves unable to assault the city directly. Their cavalry, which represented their primary advantage, was rendered useless by the ditch. What was supposed to be a quick conquest turned into a prolonged siege that the Confederate forces were unprepared to sustain. As days turned into weeks, the coalition began to fracture. Different tribes had different interests and levels of commitment to the campaign. Food and water became scarce, and morale plummeted as the warriors realized they were stuck in an indefinite siege with no clear path to victory. Muhammad skillfully exploited these divisions, sending negotiators to various tribal leaders to explore the possibility of separate peace agreements. His diplomatic efforts, combined with the physical hardships of the siege, eventually convinced most of the Confederate tribes to abandon the campaign. The collapse of the siege represented more than just a military victory for the Muslims. It was a demonstration of Muhammad's evolution as both a military strategist and a political leader. He had successfully defended his community against overwhelming odds while simultaneously undermining the coalition that threatened Islamic survival. The victory at the Battle of the Trench marked a turning point in the relationship between Mecca and Medina. The Meccan leadership began to realize that they could not defeat the Muslims through military action alone. The economic costs of constant warfare were mounting, and the coalition's failure had damaged Meccan prestige throughout Arabia. It was in this context that Muhammad made a bold and unexpected move. Following what he described as a divine vision, he announced his intention to perform the Hajj pilgrimage to Mecca with a large group of followers. This wasn't a military expedition. The pilgrims would be unarmed and would follow all the traditional customs associated with the sacred journey. The announcement created a dilemma for the Meccan leadership. Denying pilgrims access to the Kaaba would violate ancient Arabian customs and could damage their legitimacy as guardians of the holy site. However, allowing Muhammad and 1,400 of his followers to enter Mecca peacefully would represent a de facto recognition of his status and authority. The Meccans chose a middle path, sending negotiators to meet the Muslim pilgrims at Hudaybiyah, just outside the city's boundaries. The resulting negotiations produced the Treaty of Hudaybiyah, one of the most significant diplomatic agreements in Islamic history. On the surface, the treaty appeared to favor the Meccans. Muhammad agreed to postpone his pilgrimage for a year, and both sides committed to a 10-year period of peace. However, the deeper implications of the agreement were favorable to the Muslims. By negotiating with Muhammad as an equal, the Meccans had implicitly recognized his legitimacy as a political leader. The treaty also included provisions that would make it easier for tribes to ally with the Muslims without fear of Meccan retaliation. The peace established by the Treaty of Hudaybiyah allowed Islam to spread more rapidly throughout Arabia. Without the constant threat of war, Muhammad could focus on diplomatic outreach, sending ambassadors to tribes across the peninsula and establishing alliances based on shared religious and political interests. However, the peace was not destined to last. In 630 CE, allies of the Meccans violated the treaty by attacking a tribe allied with the Muslims. This breach gave Muhammad the justification he needed to march on Mecca with a force that had grown to 10,000 men. The conquest of Mecca was remarkably peaceful. Faced with overwhelming odds and recognizing that continued resistance would only lead to destruction, the Meccan leadership chose to surrender. Abu Sufyan himself, Muhammad's longtime adversary, converted to Islam and became one of the faith's defenders. Muhammad's behavior during the conquest demonstrated the principles that would guide Islamic expansion for centuries to come. Rather than seeking revenge against those who had persecuted him, he declared a general amnesty for all Meccans who accepted Islam or agreed to live peacefully under Muslim rule. The Kaaba was cleansed of its idols, but the building itself was preserved as the focal point of Islamic pilgrimage. The conquest of Mecca in 630 CE triggered a cascade of conversions and alliances across the Arabian Peninsula. Tribes that had previously remained neutral or hostile to Islam began sending delegations to Medina to negotiate their submission to Muhammad's authority. The year 630-631 CE became known as the Year of Delegations, because of the steady stream of tribal representatives seeking to join the expanding Islamic community. This rapid expansion wasn't solely the result of military conquest, though the demonstration of Muslim power certainly played a role. Muhammad's diplomatic skills and the practical benefits of joining the Islamic community were equally important factors. Tribes that submitted to Islamic authority gained access to the growing trade networks centered in Medina. Protection from other hostile groups and participation in the increasingly successful raids against non-Muslim communities. The process of Arabian unification revealed Muhammad's remarkable ability to balance idealism with pragmatism. While he never compromised on the core principles of Islamic monotheism, he was flexible in his approach to integrating new converts and allies. Some tribes were required to abandon their traditional practices immediately, while others were given time to transition gradually to full Islamic observance. By 632 CE, Muhammad's authority extended across most of the Arabian Peninsula. Only a few remote regions remained outside Islamic control, and even these were generally peaceful rather than actively hostile. The fractured tribal system that had dominated Arabian politics for centuries had been replaced by a unified religious and political community centered on Islamic principles. In the spring of 632 CE, Muhammad performed what would be his final pilgrimage to Mecca. This journey, known as the Farewell Pilgrimage, attracted tens of thousands of followers from across the Arabian Peninsula. It represented both a celebration of Islamic unity and a demonstration of how completely the religion had transformed Arabian society. During this pilgrimage, Muhammad delivered what many consider his most important sermon, spoken from Mount Arafat near Mecca. In this address, he summarized the core principles of Islam and emphasized the equality of all believers, regardless of their tribal background, social status, or ethnicity. He declared that Arab was not superior to non-Arab, that white was not superior to black, and that superiority came only through piety and good action. The sermon also contained practical guidance for the Muslim community's future development. Muhammad emphasized the importance of treating women with respect and kindness, warned against the dangers of excessive materialism, and stressed the need for Muslims to continue supporting one another as brothers and sisters in faith. Upon returning to Medina after the pilgrimage, Muhammad fell ill with a fever that would prove fatal. He died on June 8, 632 CE, at the age of 62, leaving behind a transformed Arabian Peninsula and a religious movement that was poised to expand far beyond the desert boundaries of his homeland. Muhammad's death marked the end of the prophetic period of Islam, but it was also the beginning of something even more remarkable: the rapid expansion of Islamic civilization across 3 continents. The political and military structures he had established in Arabia became the foundation for conquests that would, within a century, create an empire stretching from Spain to Central Asia. The success of early Islamic expansion was built on several key factors that originated during Muhammad's lifetime. The unified Arabian Peninsula provided a strong base of operations and a steady supply of experienced warriors who had learned the art of warfare during the conflicts between Mecca and Medina. The religious motivation provided by Islamic teachings gave these armies a sense of purpose and destiny that their opponents often lacked. Perhaps most importantly, Muhammad had created a system of governance that could adapt to the administration of diverse populations across different regions. The principles he established in Medina, religious tolerance for people of the book, Christians and Jews, practical administration focused on justice and efficiency, and the integration of local elites into the governing structure, became the template for Islamic rule across the expanding empire. The story of how Muslims conquered Arabia is ultimately the story of how one man's religious vision became a political and social revolution that transformed not just the Arabian Peninsula, but much of the known world. From the trading cities of Mecca and Medina to the courts of Damascus and Baghdad, the principles established by Muhammad continued to shape Islamic civilization for centuries to come. This incredible story of faith, determination, and transformation shows us how ideas can change the world when they're backed by courage and conviction. If you found this journey through history as fascinating as we did, please give this video a thumbs up and hit that subscribe button so you never miss our deep dives into the amazing stories that shaped our world. Share this with anyone who loves learning about how great movements begin, because understanding the past helps us better understand our present. What aspect of Muhammad's story impressed you most? Let us know in the comments below, and don't forget to ring that notification bell for more incredible historical content.